Everyone has at least one good story. What's yours? I transferred groups within my company and it was my first day in the new group. I got to my office and my new bosses were smoking outside. I shot the shit with them and went up to the office to sit in my new spot. I was on the 9th floor with my back to the window. I sat down at my computer and turned it on. A few seconds later there was a massive explosion behind me. The whole building shook. I ran to the window and saw a bunch of debris floating in the air and a lot of birds flying in crazy patterns. My first thought was a car bomb, but I couldn't see anything looking down. After a few seconds, I crouched down in my window and looked up. I saw a massive gaping hole in World Trade 1. I was maybe a 150 yards away at 220 to Broadway, right across the street from St. Paul's Church. So I had an unobstructed view. I kept staring at the impact site until the second explosion, second clean, woke me the duck up and everyone figured out it wasn't random. I tried calling out, but all the lines were down. It was election day in New York City, so my grandma was working in one of the polling stations. My parents were on vacation in France. I managed to reach my friend's dad and asked him to call and tell people I'm okay. I went back to the window and saw people jump. That was by far the worst part for me. A bit later I did manage to reach my friend. I was on the phone with her when one of the towers started collapsing. I yelled they're falling into the phone. THRW it down and ran towards the stairwell. Last thing I heard was what's falling out of the receiver. I managed to make it down into a sub-basement with a few other people. Others were in server rooms, and some left the building and ran. After a couple of hours in the basement, the building access system was overloaded, and our room started filling up with smoke and dust. I found some water and soaked my shirt, wrapped it around my face, and got the duck out. I walked northeast, past City Hall Park, towards the bridges. Brooklyn Bridge had a lot of smoke blowing over it, so I went to Manhattan Bridge, along with a few thousand others. In the middle of the bridge, a couple of military planes flew fairly low over the bridge and everyone hit the deck. That was true terror. After I made it to Brooklyn, there were a bunch of people handing out water, a church on one side of Flatbush Avenue, and a synagogue on the other. It was a very New York City moment. I went into a school and used the phone to let somebody know I was alive. It was another 2 hours of walking till I made it home. In the evening, I got together with all of my buddies and we tried to get drunk. It didn't work. We drank and nobody felt it. It was too much. I managed to get in touch with my parents the next morning. They couldn't call New York at all for almost 24 hours because the lines were overwhelmed. You could smell the smoke for months, especially on the subways. It was shitty. In backyard with dog for poop time. Dog does a squat for 5 minutes. Way too long. Inspect and see red thing coming out of butt. Wear plastic bag on hand. Proceed to pull out of dog's butt. Strictly 1 inch, 3 inches, 5 inches. WTF is this? His intestine? See clothing tag. Pull out my sister's panties. 100% intact. Covered in shit. TLDR. Pulled my sister's panties out of my dog's butthole. That's the best magic trick I've ever heard. I have been on this site for over 2 years and have never had the chance to tell my favorite story of all time. I was a resident assistant my junior year of college and thankfully, all my residents got along great, except for Mike. Mike wasn't a bad guy at all, he was just odd. It seemed like he never showered and communicated largely in grunts while looking at his shoes. His roommate, Dwayne, was amazing. Based on how he dressed and carried himself you'd assume he was an alpha douche, but in reality, he was one of the sweetest, kindest people ever and was in school to pursue a career in working with special needs adults. One day I walk out of my room and hear Dwayne muttering to himself and shaking his head. I can't really hear what he's saying, but I can tell about 60% of it is swears, which was just not like him. I walk up and say, "Hey, what's going on? You okay?" Apostrophe. He shakes his head and sighs. "It's Mike, man." Apostrophe. "What happened?" Apostrophe. "I heard a noise last night after we both went to bed, so I look over and he's jerking off." Apostrophe. I stifle a laugh and put on my serious face. That's messed up. I'll talk to him about that, or I'll have my boss call him down to the office. Apostrophe. He just stares at me for a second and clenches his jaw. That's not the bad part, man. When he finished, he partook. Apostrophe. He partook. For some reason, I can't or won't understand what that means. Dwayne sees my confusion and says, calmly, quietly, like Winnie the Pooh, man, lick that shit off like it was honey. Before you become an rat at my alma mater, you're given 2 full weeks of training on everything from how to handle rape to how to order chicken wings for a program. Nowhere in that time do they discuss how to handle a grown man eating his cum in front of his roommate. I tell Dwayne that we can go to my director right then and there, and I will advocate and all but guarantee either getting the kids suspended, or at the very least letting one of them change rooms. Dwayne just takes a sad, slow breath and declines the offer. He says that if that happens, someone less equipped to deal with Mike's difficulties will be affected, and he can't do that. He goes on to say this is a teachable moment and he's going to try to help Mike with what he's learned in his classes. And that was the day my faith in humanity was destroyed and rebuilt in 5 minutes. TL. Doctor, he partook. I was a part of a robotics team my senior year of high school. Ended up winning in a regional competition in California and made it to the national in Street. Louis, MO. 2 friends and I shared a hotel room and basically just hung out all night and played video games. Around the wee hours of the morning, maybe 1 to 2 AM. I decide I'm not ready to call it a night, which I should have, since we had a competition in the morning, and wanted to venture out into the street to walk around Street Louis. Upon opening the door I hear something rip. Those slight chaperones did the old tape on the door trick, to see who snuck out at night. Now, I was fairly straight edge in high school. Didn't get around to smoking or drinking until after I had graduated and never got in trouble at school. Being so early in the morning my mind started racing thinking I'd be in big trouble and worrying so much about getting kicked from the team or being suspended. I woke one of my friends up and asked what to do, and he just brushed it off and went back to sleep. So, in my worried state, I proceeded to tear the tape off of every door on that floor. About halfway through I start wondering, man, do we really have this many people on our team? I had a huge wad of tape after a while, and it did take a while, since I was scared of waking anyone up and basically solid snaked it, hugging the wall and peering over every corner. Finally the deed was done, and disposed of the baseball in some planter. By the time I get down to the lobby I'm too tired to walk out and just hang by some grand piano they have there. By morning everyone is wondering who went out, and I just kept a straight face not wanting to get caught. While we are having breakfast downstairs I overhear someone talking about the missing tape. It turns out there was another team, an all-girls team on the same floor, who got in trouble before lights out for having a guy in their room and the whole thing was blamed on them. In the end, I fessed up to prevent them from getting in serious trouble and had the lobby guy vouch for me that I was just hanging out downstairs hammering out some tunes on the grand piano. Anyway, that's the one story I tell every now and then. One time I was flying from Long Beach, California to Dulles near DC. I'm in the waiting area, and I see a girl from my school. Being a freshman in high school at the time, I was pretty much in love with every girl I saw. But I had a special crush on this girl, Annie, for all of a month cause she was a cute little theater geek who was one of the nicest and bubbliest of people I had ever met. I never was that kid who was afraid of talking to girls. So I went over and shot the shit with her while we were waiting for boarding on the actual plane. She was all the way in the back and I was right over the wing. So I didn't see her during the actual flight. So, for some background, I'm terrified of airplanes. On an airplane, I have to be able to see the horizon and the earth out the window. I have to know what's going on. I will sit in a window seat and grab the armrests hard enough that it's like I'm trying to fly the airplane through them. For the entire flight, my arms and neck always ache for a day or so afterwards. If we are going through clouds, or it's at night over the ocean, I flip out and go into an anxiety attack and completely shut down. So I'm doing my usual thing. trying to fly the plane through the armrests and staring intently through the window while trying not to make any noises or freak out the people next to me. This flight was somewhat bad because it was at night and there were clouds everywhere, and whoever was on the window seat on the other side of the plane had closed the window, so I couldn't see the horizon or the ground if the plane turned left. So basically hell. But then the unthinkable happened and I had to go to the bathroom. I have literal nightmares about airplane bathrooms. No windows. Modern airliners all have this computer software called Airborne Collision Avoidance System. Essentially, it uses radar to tell if the plane is too close to another plane and makes it automatically dive if it thinks it's too close and might crash. So guess when it malfunctioned? While I was peeing. I scream in terror. I wasn't the only one in the plane doing that. Actually, while the plane goes into a nosedive, I freak out and zip up too quickly, causing myself to scream in pain. I was the only one this time. The pilot has corrected the plane by this point, so I clean myself up and sneak back into my seat while everyone is distracted by the PA message telling them what happened. I run into Annie a few days later and we were all like, weird. We saw each other on that flight. That dive thing was weird. Yeah, and then she says, yeah, some guy was screaming in the bathroom and he kept on screaming. It kind of creeped me out. She will never know it was me. My grandfather was captured in North Africa during World War II. He was taken as a prisoner of war, POW, to a Nazi camp in East Germany. During an air raid by the Allied forces on the camp, the officers led prisoners out of their rooms, as it was easier to let them into the yard. A few bombs hit the camp, and when a bomb hit, people dived into the holes left in the ground as it was safer there. Lightning doesn't strike twice. Close bracket. When this happened to my grandfather, he jumped into the hole at the same time as a German officer. While they were waiting for the air raid to pass, the German officer turned to my grandfather and asked, in a perfect English accent, would you care for a smoke? While we wait, my grandfather asked why his accent was so good. The officer said he had German parents, but grew up in the UK, in a town called Brighton. My grandfather grew up in Brighton and asked the officer's name. When he heard the name, he recognized it immediately as someone he played with in the streets of Brighton where he grew up. And there they were, enemies with a shared past, lying in a bomb crater, sharing a cigarette while waiting for an air raid to pass and the war to end. That was the only war story my grandfather told my father before he died. Short version, I came back to the US after living in England for 4 years. My friend failed to meet me at the airport, so I rented a car to drive 50 miles to my home. Confused by the new construction around the airport, I stopped at the first gas station to ask for directions. Me, how do I get to the main road going east? Clark, if you go east, you'll go into the ocean. He pulls out a map and surely enough, I had flown into Charleston, South Carolina, not Charleston, West Virginia. I spent the night in a motel and flew out the next day with a good story and minus $300 in my pocket. Back in the 90s I worked at an engineering supply shop. It was called Cogs Unlimited, and it was basically a huge warehouse with thousands of different types of cogs and other equipment. It looks a bit like this link. imga.com/WKX90 JPG. My job was to answer the phone and take the orders, write down the serial numbers and quantity, then pass that on to the other guys who would locate the correct shelf and retrieve the parts to be sent to the buyers. Anyway, our phone number was similar to the phone number of a Santa phone service. Basically, kids call the number and talk to a voice actor playing Santa. The problem is that we would often get kids calling our number, expecting it to be Santa, but instead are greeted by an unenthusiastic greeting of Cogs Unlimited. At first I would just let them know they had the wrong number, but as it got closer to Christmas, the calls became more and more frequent, so I had to do something. If it was a slow day, and I got a call from a kid expecting Santa, I would just play the role of Santa and ask what they want for Christmas. Tell them they're on the good list, etc. Unless the kid was rude. I remember one annoying little brat who called and demanded an unreasonable amount of presents. As Santa, I'll let him know that he's on the bad list and will only be getting coal, and that I've sent some of my elves over to his house to hide in the garden and scare him. A few minutes after I hung up, I received a phone call from his furious mother, demanding to know why I told her child all those bad things. I told her we just sell cogs, and that she's got the wrong number, and I never heard from her again. I've told this one before, but whatever, it's a favorite. I was in middle school in the early 1990s, around when Sam's Clubs and the like started opening up. None of us could drive yet, obviously. We were like 14, and few of our parents had club memberships. So it was rare that anyone could go there and buy stuff. And none of us had jobs or anything anyway. So you're looking at about $5 in allowance here and there as your budget. One kid had a great idea and bought some of those huge bags of blow pops for $5. Let's say he walked away with 100 blow pops, 5c a piece. He came to school and sold them for a quarter and was out of stock within a few days. He did this for probably 3 weeks before others got in on the game. There were a bunch of arguments over whether the others had to go into a different line of candy or if blow pops were fair game. The first wave decided that everyone needed their own kind of candy, creating a little cartel. Kind of funny in retrospect. Close bracket. About a month or so later, a new kid starts selling, and he has everything. Must have spent $50, maybe $100, but he quickly ran into a problem. The school started cracking down on student-run candy sales in the cafeteria. So lunchtime, where the money was, became a really dangerous time to sell. Most of the kids who were selling just stopped cashing out while they could, but this one kid had way too much candy to do that. There were only 4 classes after lunch and you really weren't selling candy during the first 2 periods. So that left 5 or 6 reasonably good times to find customers. The bad news was that typically, you had the same kids, give or take, in all of your classes by now. Because we were broken up into levels. The exception, things like gym and band, were really bad times to sell candy. The good news was that homeroom was between 2nd and 3rd period. And that was homogeneous. So you got to see kids you'd otherwise not see, and more importantly, they'd see kids you'd otherwise not see. The kid with all the candy ended up repackaging it into Ziplocs of 5 pieces and sold it them to kids for $1 each. That happened for a few days until one of the kids in his homeroom asked to buy 5, explaining that he was reselling the candy for 25c a piece and effectively getting a free piece of candy each day. And there were a few kids in his next period class who wanted to do the same. He offered $4 because he wanted to make a profit off his friends. The kid with all the candy agreed, and not only sold out by the end of the week, but ended up buying another $50 or so worth of candy to do it the next week. Too. A few other kids in the homeroom caught wind of this and wanted in. Candy Kid ended up selling 5 bags at a time to about 5 or 10 kids in his homeroom, each seeing the opportunity to make a free $1 a day just by being middlemen. It was an easy sale. You tell your friends how you bought the candy and sold it quickly and flashed them the wad of singles you had. It worked for 2 days, maybe 3. Basically, the entire grade got flooded with candy sellers, and the candy being sold wasn't scarce anymore because the supply wasn't controlled by one person or a cartel. It was a commodity now. Prices crashed to like 10c per piece and the MLM style distribution structure couldn't support that price. The whole supply dried up pretty quickly thereafter, and with teachers starting to crack down, no one re-entered the market for months. Please subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe.